Okay, we're at paragraph 5. Throughout the modern period until quite recently, it was assumed, both by the philosophers who denied free will and by those who defended it, that determinism is inconsistent with free will. So, let's take a special look here. So, he's talking about a what? An assumption. Again, we're doing critical reading together, taking notes together. So, here Stace is identifying an assumption that philosophers have made when deciding whether or not free will is possible, a part of reality. And so this assumption has to do with whether or not determinism is, we could say here, incompatible with free will. Okay, so now let's look at the word determinism here. Remember what I said in an earlier lecture. When you see determinism, sometimes philosophers use that as shorthand for hard determinism, and I think that's unfortunate. What you should write here, maybe right here, is write the word metaphysical determinism. Remember, I said in an earlier written lecture that I'll be using metaphysical determinism to refer to the claim or idea that everything that was, is, or will be has a cause. That includes behavior, things that you can observe in nature, in the world around you, using your senses. It includes mental states, psychological states, emotions, feelings, actions, just anything. The idea is that everything is caused. Now, remember that this is also called in the reading the thesis of universal causation. So I would write metaphysical determinism, maybe with an arrow over here, put see previous written lecture about metaphysical determinism and universal and thesis of universal causation. Okay, the idea that everything is caused. So right here, he's not talking about hard determinism necessarily. He's not referencing libertarianism. It's just the general view, the position that everything has a cause. And then instead of, like I said, instead of inconsistent, we could say incompatible. So if a man's actions, so now he's going on. Oh, and another thing to elaborate here is that what he's doing here is he's using his own intellectual empathy. Here, Stace is using intellectual empathy to enter into a different viewpoint. He is trying to understand how it is that some philosophers think about the problem of free will and the relation between determinism and free will. So he's using intellectual empathy to state what other people think about the compatibility of metaphysical determinism, aka the thesis of universal causation, and free will. So he's still giving the view of others, that is, of those who deny free will, which would be the hard determinist, and by those who defend it, which could be here, compatibilists will defend it, or soft determinists will defend it. But here he's really talking about libertarians. So, and then right here, he's not talking about any group. Right here, he's not referencing a position of hard determinism, libertarianism, or soft determinism. Again, it's just the general thesis that everything is caused that is accepted by both the hard determinist and the soft determinist. And by the way, do you see how doing the Learn Smart reading and all the other items in this Blackboard created review have led you to the point where you can follow my lecture? To the extent that you really engaged with the Learn Smart reading, to the extent that you fully engaged with items, I think it was 4, 5, and 6 from this Blackboard created review, I have created a foundation and scaffolded your ability to make sense of what I'm saying. So the more you paid attention and engaged with the previous videos in this Blackboard created review and the Learn Smart reading from week 4, the more able you are to follow me. Okay, so, and you can see why I did it, so that we can make sense of this philosophical text together. So again, he's still giving the position of people who have something to say about metaphysical determinism and free will. So I already read this part, and so this is the assumption that he is identifying, and we know because he says it was assumed that they could not, in this case, be free. So you could circle or underline assumption twice. And what is the assumption? The assumption is that it cannot be true that metaphysical determinism cannot be true while free will is also true, or it's impossible for metaphysical determinism to be a reality while at the same time free will is also a part of reality. It is not possible for you to think that everything is caused and we still have free will at the same time. That is what some people think, the libertarians and the hard determinist. Again, Stace is just telling us what some philosophers think. So then he says, this implies that a certain definitions of action done from free will was assumed. So notice how many times he's used the word assumed. One, two, 3 times. So you can see his focus in this paragraph really is on an assumption that is made by some philosophers. Remember, in the first paragraph, he was giving us the context. And then in the second, third paragraphs, he started to ask questions and frame the true nature of the problem. And now he's trying to show us an assumption that has to do with the solution, with the nature of the problem and the solution to the problem. And he's focused here, of course, on free will and ideas about metaphysical determinism. So then he says, namely, that they are actions not wholly determined by causes, um, so that they could be predicted. Okay, so I read that part. This implies that a certain definition of actions done from free will was assumed, namely that they are actions not wholly determined by causes or predictable beforehand. So what this is right here is he's saying, here's a definition that some people have given for free will. And these lines right here, 1, 2, 3, and then right here. This is what would be called a negative definition because it's telling you what something is, but by telling you what it is not. So if we wrote the word free will, and then I said, give me the definition for free will that is here, we would call that a negative definition. So free will is expressed when actions are not wholly determined by causes or predictable beforehand. Of course, if we're talking about the thesis of universal causation, what I'm calling metaphysical determinism, we're talking about not only actions, but choices, feelings, emotions, mental states, all kinds of things. Then he says, let us shorten this by saying that free will was defined as meaning indeterminism. Okay, so now he's getting to he's isolating the definition that some people are using when they deny free will. And so he's saying, well, here's a shortened definition. Free will has been defined by some as meaning indeterminism. So what does that mean? That means that not everything has a cause, right? Not everything is caused by a prior event and can be traced to a whole series of past events. He says this is what? The incorrect definition which has led to the denial of free will. So again, got to be really careful when reading philosophical text. Up here, what he's doing is he's telling us, or he's giving us his take as best as he can, using intellectual empathy, how others think about free will, how they determine it, and how they define it in terms of the thesis of universal causation or metaphysical determinism. It is only till he gets to the very end, right here, that he makes a judgment. So right here, he's just trying to show you that this is what they think. And a lot of students miss this. They think that he really believes that a man is a five-legged creature and that free will is really to be defined as actions that are not wholly determined by causes, or that free will is undeterminism, those actions which have no causes. And then it's not until he gets to the end that he makes a judgment. Of course, you can't make a judgment about something until you show you've understood it, and that's what he thinks he's done up here. So the incorrect definition, which has led to the denial of free will, that's what he's identified. As soon as we see what the true definition is, we shall find that the question whether the world is deterministic, as Newtonian science implied, or in a measure indeterministic, as current physics teaches, is wholly irrelevant to the problem. So that's a really interesting thing to say. So he's made a judgment that if you define determinism as what? That actions are not wholly determined by causes, or that it means that some actions at least have no causes. He's saying that that's an incorrect definition. But not only that, he says it doesn't even matter if metaphysical determinism is true. Even if everything is caused, we can still have be free and have free will. In other words, he's saying Stace himself is implying is that it is possible that that everything is caused, and that itself is compatible with there being free will. But it's right here where he lets us know, hey, there's an incorrect definition of free will being used by the deniers of free will, and the definition that he has isolated for the rest of this is that free will is when something is not wholly determined by causes or meaning indeterminism. All right, so I think in this one, I think some important really words to take note of include assumed. So whenever you see that, free will, whenever you see that, you want to put a triangle over that. Determinism, this whole notion of what it means for something to be consistent or compatible, that's a big important standard in philosophy when you're thinking about your views on free will or morality, whether something's right and wrong, the possibility of genuine knowledge, a philosophical principle at hand is that your beliefs should not contradict each other and that your beliefs should be consistent with one another. Ideas that you have should be consistent with each other and cohere in a fashion that doesn't show any kind of contradictions or self contradictions or whatnot. So, inconsistent, free will, um, wholly determined, causes, past, causes, assumed, free. Of course, definition, actions, determined, causes, free will, defined, meaning, indeterminism. And then some other important words would be incorrect, definition, free will, true definition. That's an important phrase right there. True definition. And then this part I'm not really so worried about, but he's basically saying whether or not some things are completely caused turns out to be not important, and you'll see that later. But here you can really see where he's connecting what he has presented and explained as a verbal problem to the problem of free will specifically. Okay, so I think I'll do a separate video again.